All right. So we're going to talk today about the 747 strategy. Now, we call it 747 because we're running it 7 days a week. We are hitting typically about 4 different times a day, and we have 7 different networks. So the concept is to aggressively pursue content through the most viable and easiest format to perform based off some calendaring and some thought process around how we're doing this. So we start out this content marketing strategy, which is really more or less uh, an ability to take the thought leadership from an authority at a company or a practice and extract from them details, whether it's between themselves and another party, or if it's just themselves alone. What we want to do is first start out with a little bit of research. And usually we know what this is because we understand the industry we're working in, depending on what the challenges are in that particular market, to talk about that. And then initially setting up some goals. So when we talk about goals, what we're really looking at is trying to predict what will happen from our strategy, right? So we've done some analysis in the market. We realized here's the challenges, and then our goal is to address those challenges. Well, what necessarily, there's 2 types of results. It's addressing the challenges and also addressing the scope of the project, meaning that we have different scopes based off of the, let's just say, throughput we want to produce. Now, the content strategy, which is interesting, we can do this in 2 different ways. We find the easiest way to do this is to get a map out of mapping through a calendar and figuring out themes, and then bringing the themes back into sort of the uh, process of putting that into production. Now, from a creation standpoint, so now we're kind of getting into the mix of this. We are taking that content. Now, usually we're either doing um, a piece of content, meaning we can write, but more usually we're doing a blog post slash podcast or show. So in most cases, what we'll do is we'll get a 20-minute episode between a owner or a practitioner or a business person that's in the office talking about the particular thing that we've come up with for the topic. And now, this can also be an interview with a client. This can also be an interview with a patient. This could be a vendor. So there's many ways to chop up the opportunity, but it's really to get about 20 minutes of video content, usually done through a webinar type of scenario, WebEx, or online GoToMeeting, and record it so that we get a great uh, interview almost process. So then we take that content, we then take the content and move it then into production, right? We put it into production, we cut that content up and cut it up into different slices based off of the sound bites we get out of these podcasts, or we have just regular physical text content, we'll break it up into pieces of topics. Because obviously, if it's 20 minutes worth of content being delivered through a podcast, it's probably about 5,000 plus words in that. So now we get into distribution, where we are now going to be putting this into all the different social channels and all the different, if we are running a podcast, into the podcast networks. And we are then measuring the engagement from our activity. So we know that if we see people who are engaged, responding to these content pieces, that we know we've done our job from the very beginning to find out what people are looking for. So what does this do? It builds the brand by being authority, by putting a valued piece of content into the world. 2, it brings brand equity. Basically brings the brand up a notch above its competitors because you're building out your equity into the market. and providing value. And then there's also the very most important thing, which is we actually are giving the search engines a ability to now pick up this content, right? Because it's going to be in blog posts, it's going to be in social media, it's going to be everywhere. So let's get into what this looks like in reality. So now let's look at a typical calendaring function. So in this case, we can see we've got a calendar that's set up on a monthly basis. So in particular, let's just say we're in this week where we are looking at this week's material. So we can see that we've got a calendar that's set up on a weekly basis with the topics. So we've got sick child, heart health, well child, Saturday appointments. So we've actually got a calendar strategy based off of this. Now we're doing every other day here based off of the requirements from the practitioner in this particular case. But you can see each month we have a calendar set up with what we're going to be posting and how we're going to be doing it. Again, there are monthly themes and there are individual posts. So we really want to break out things into theming. So here's our theme for the month. So these are the things we've discussed, we figured out, we put some goals together, here's what we want to do. And then here are our posts based off of those themes that we are going to put in. Now, I'm not going to get into the distribution point right now because we're going to see that in a minute, but obviously you can see we've taken the themes and then we've broken them out into different categories into each day where we would post. Again, this is what we would do as a team. Now, let's look at this at a distribution layer for content. So now we can see, in this case, you're going to see the functional distribution. So now if we took, for example, here is a, here's the blog post itself. Okay, so here the full podcast video is 30 minutes. We can see that we have now, we have 1, 2, 3 separate summary videos, a 60-second, a 30-second, and a 50-second summary. Now below this, we're going to also see that we have a bunch of separate individual sound bites. So we've got now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 snippets. They're all 1-minute snippets, and they all, if you want to see what it looks like, I could show you a small little sample here. We can see that it's showing the sequences for this particular sequence, and there's a video that shows, and we're talking about a particular part of a right. Automations that are behind this, you can see the campaigns that are set up. Right. So now we can see we're drawing attention to what it's about. We're also having a capture on the bottom with closed captions so people can actually see and they can read the content. So now we've got, if we go back to this, we've got 3 summary videos that encapsulate the summary of the full video. Plus we've got 10 1-minute snippets that are based off of small sections. Now we're taking those pieces of content and we're putting it into the main posting for the company: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google My Business, and also into LinkedIn. So we have all the different posts with the copy at the top and a link back to a landing page to capture someone who's interested in the topic. So now we've got a full functioning breakout with 13 different pieces of content based off of one 30-minute video that is going into distribution of 7 different networks, okay? With copy and a link to a landing page to then go back to the full episode. All right. So now we can look at what that looks like in a drawing. So in that particular case, we took the raw podcast. We took a short video summary and we broke it all in. We added graphics, transcriptions, and we got copy onto those pieces of content. We broke those into summary videos. We broke those into further short summary 1-minute videos. We got all the contents and headlines approved for those short videos. We then put them into Facebook and Instagram, and we boost those pieces of content. Okay. We also, as we mentioned before, we put them into, let's see if I can get this to move. We get those into Twitter, LinkedIn, and Google, My Business. And we can boost all of those posts as well if we want to. Most of the time, we're boosting just in Facebook and Instagram. Okay. So we also will boost that into YouTube, right? So we know that there is also another network that we can use that will be distributed through all of the different channels within YouTube. But also, we are going to be taking that podcast and putting it into podcast distribution where it goes into iTunes and Tune and Podbeam and iHeart and Stitcher and everything else under the sun. So we end up with about 164 pieces of content that goes into distribution for just 2 short podcasts. As you can tell, we've split the content up into several different pieces. So that's what we look at from a perspective of a client when we're working with someone. We're actually trying to drive as much as we can into the networks from a short video podcast. So you can understand by putting together a fully and comprehensive themed strategy based off of research and a little bit of activity, we can build authority, we can build brand equity, we can build SEO by putting over 150 pieces of content into the distribution just by doing a couple of podcasts. Now we call it a show because obviously if we're using a video, we're going to be creating an environment that's driving show type activity. So once this gets into the network, it really becomes a consistency so that you're bleeping every single, like a radar screen, you're bleeping that you are there and you're there to provide value. And again, it doesn't always have to be a video podcast. It can be straight out content. We have a lot of folks who just want content creation, but we prefer if you do the video because it always is a better resource for everyone. So this has created a lot of tailwind for a lot of our clients because especially even for us, because what people say, and they say this to me all the time, they say, I saw your video, I want what you're doing, and I trust you because I've seen enough material from you that you know what you're doing and you have a grip on what we're trying to accomplish. And I think this works for anybody in any category because what you're doing is you're providing a flood of information into the networks. You're being found on multiple channels and you are setting yourself up for success because it's evergreen content that will always stay into the networks. It doesn't go anywhere. So people can pick up podcasts and YouTube videos and pieces of content on social media for years after you've done it. So it's not as if it's an ad that disappears when you turn the ad off. This is there forever, and that's why we call it 747, because it delivers an immediate ability to really take off with a content strategy.